Hey there YouTube, I'm Forrest Lauderdale Skeptic, and welcome to part 2 of my 3-part series on my theory of the independent want. In part 1, I presented the moral paradigm that I believe gave an answer to the question, why do we act? My answer to that question was the independent want, which was the want that we have at the root of all of our actions. This want creates the goal that becomes the reference point for all actions. You may or may not have bought into this argument, or you're like me and you're still chewing on it. But either way, if it is true, there's some amazing implications that I want to explore in this video. The first interesting implication is that the independent want is the necessary reason for anything we do. In my previous video on morality, I made the case that it may be true that we all have the same goal, such as well-being or pleasure, but I said that it's not necessarily the case that we have the same goal. Just because all humans happen to have the same preference, it doesn't mean that they have to. Think about taste, for example. Is it objectively true that dirt tastes bad, even if every human on Earth agrees that it's gross? Of course not. And this is the same idea that I was driving at when I discussed subjectively universal morality. Well-being may be the subjectively universal goal, but it's not necessarily the goal. The independent want solves this problem. It gives us a necessary purpose. It's the most fundamental reason for any human action. You can ask, why do I want well-being? But you can't ask, why do I want to want? It's the same as asking, why is a circle round? The statement, a circle is round, is true by definition. And in that sense, the statement, the reason that we do anything is because we want, is true by definition. Another way to conceptualize this idea is to say, if we didn't want, then we would have no reason. The second, but potentially the most significant implication, is that it seems to bridge Hume's is-ought gap. The basic idea behind the is-ought gap is that you're unable to derive ought statements from purely is statements. For example, just because a fire is hot does not mean that you ought not touch it.
Can you derive what you ought to do from facts about the world? This is a style of argument many people use. They take how things are and use that to draw conclusions about how things should be. For example, we evolved as meat-eating animals. Therefore, we ought to eat meat. Is this a reasonable way of arguing? David Hume thought not. In his view, people move too readily from observations of facts to judgments about values. There's a gap in their reasoning. This is the famous is-ought gap, also known as Hume's law or Hume's guillotine, because he severs any direct connection between facts and values. In the meat-eating example, there's an implied unstated assumption. We ought to do whatever we evolved to do. But that is a controversial moral premise that vegetarians would dispute. Since Hume described it in the 18th century, numerous moralists have tried to bridge this is-ought gap. They've argued from what is natural or unnatural to what we should or shouldn't do, from facts about what makes human beings happy to evaluations of what we should do next, or from discoveries about human biology to claims about how we ought to live. If Hume was right, they've all committed a logical mistake.
I know this is a bold claim, but I broke it down into a syllogism that hopefully makes it easier to follow. For the syllogism, I am assuming materialism, because to me, the is-ought gap is the biggest problem for a materialist. I also define the word ought as an action's relationship to a goal, because to me, that's the only way to make sense of the word. For example, if you don't want to get burned, then you ought not put your hand on the fire. Okay, with that information on the table, here's the syllogism. P1. Wanting is a physical phenomenon. P2. If we want, then we have a goal. P3. If we have a goal, then we have an ought. P4. We want, therefore we ought. This seems to indicate because of what is the physical state of our brains, we can derive an ought. I can already hear people saying, but why should we do what the brain is telling us if it's just the arbitrary state of your brain? And to those people, I refer you back to the necessary nature of wanting. We want to do what our brain wants because it's impossible to do otherwise. In other words, could you want to do anything other than what you want? These questions start to make no sense once you really conceptualize the premise that we always do what we want. The third significant implication is that it unifies the language of many philosophers before and solves the problem of which adjective to use. Is it pleasure or joy? Happiness, well-being? Suffering or not suffering? Are these words circular? Is something pleasurable because you want it or because it brings you a certain emotional state? Do we all experience pleasure the same way? Are we even referring to the same emotional state of being? These are serious problems for these moral frameworks because it seems that nobody can come up with the right word that encompasses the motivation for all of our actions. Now with the independent want, we have a term that unifies what all of these theories were getting at. We want pleasure, we want well-being, we want joy. This want unifies all these theories. But remember, wanting something is not the same as the thing itself. The independent want is the reason we care about well-being, joy, and pleasure. Lastly, this framework can be used as a tool to guide our actions. Wisdom seems to be the ability to correlate our actions to the independent want. There are often competing dependent wants, and the dependent want that leads more directly to the independent want is the want we ought to satisfy. Actions that lead you through a maze of dependent wants will take you longer to get to the independent want, and in some cases, it may never get there. A wise person is able to do those actions that satisfy the independent want the quickest. Whenever we do any action, we should ask ourselves if we believe that that action will lead us to the independent want the quickest. I know this theory isn't perfect, and I'm still trying to work out some of the finer details, like how dependent wants interact with independent wants. Also, are there multiple types of independent wants, or is it all the same want? So this is still a working theory, but I've been thinking about it a lot lately, especially whenever a philosophical conversation comes up that involves a long chain of why questions. I can't help but notice the words want and desire jumping out at me while the people using them ignore their significance.
After all, they argued, happiness is our final end. It's what we do everything else for. Think about it like this. Many things that you do for the sake of something else. You study to get a good grade, you work to get money. But why do you want good grades or money? There are different answers we could give, like maybe we're seeking affirmation for our intelligence or the approval of our parents or a degree that will give us a career that we want. But why do we want that particular career? Why do we want approval? We can keep asking these questions, but ultimately our answer will bottom out in, I want what I want because I think it will make me happy. That's what we all want. It's one of the few things everyone has in common. And utilitarians believe that's what should drive our morality. Like Kant, utilitarians agree that a moral theory should apply equally to everyone, but they thought the way to do that was to ground it in something that's really intuitive. And there's really nothing more basic than the primal desire to seek pleasure and avoid pain.
I think this new paradigm can provide a lot of answers to some challenging questions in moral philosophy. So please let me know what you think, and let me know if there's any ways that you think I can improve it. That's all I've got. Go check out part 3 where I apply this theory to society and culture. I'm Forrest, the Latter-day Skeptic. Please like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.